Are you saying that was wrong? The question sounded simple. Almost casual. A moment earlier the conversation had been normal. Nothing serious. Nothing tense. But something in the way it was asked made the moment slow down. You said you didn't mean anything by it. Just a comment. That's all. Something small people say in normal conversations every day. Still, the air in the room changed slightly. They looked at you for a second and said, it just sounded different. Not angry. Not accusing. Just enough to make you pause and think about what you had said. You remember that moment, don't you? Nothing big had happened yet. No argument. No raised voices. From the outside it would have looked like a normal conversation between two people. But inside the conversation, something shifted. The focus quietly moved away from the topic, and toward you. Toward your words. Toward what you meant. So you explained it again. You clarified the comment. You made it clear there was no hidden meaning behind it. It was just what it sounded like. They nodded slowly, like they understood. Then they asked another small question. So that's really all you meant? Now the conversation wasn't about the original topic anymore. It was about your intention. About whether something had been meant the wrong way. This is where many people first notice something feels different. Not wrong. Just slightly unfamiliar. Because moments like this often feel harmless. A quick misunderstanding. A small clarification. Nothing worth thinking about too much. Still, the conversation had changed direction. Quietly. Almost invisibly. And that small change is often the moment when the dynamic begins moving in a different direction. You noticed it, didn't you? Are you sure that's what you meant? The question sounded calm. Almost curious. Nothing about it seemed aggressive. Just a small pause in the conversation, followed by a simple request for clarification. So you explained again. The comment was harmless, at least from your point of view. It wasn't meant to criticize anything or start a disagreement. It was just part of the conversation. They listened quietly and nodded a little. Then they said something even smaller. It just sounded a bit different when you said it. Now the moment became slightly more careful. Not serious. Not tense. Just a little more focused than it had been before. You probably reacted the way most people do. Calm. Reasonable. You clarified what you meant so there would be no misunderstanding. A short explanation. A small adjustment to keep the conversation smooth. Because at that point, it didn't feel like anything important had happened. Look, this is often where the first boundary appears. And most of the time, it doesn't look like a boundary at all. It looks like a small correction. A tiny shift in tone. A moment where the conversation quietly moves toward your intention, instead of the topic itself. So, you adjusted slightly. Maybe you softened your words the next time you spoke. Maybe you added a quick explanation before making a comment, just to make sure everything stayed clear. Nothing dramatic. Just a small change in how you spoke. They seemed satisfied. The conversation continued normally after that. The moment passed, and everything appeared fine again. That's usually how these moments look the first time. Because the action itself is very small. A question. A reaction. A gentle comment that invites you to explain yourself. And explaining yourself is not a problem. In normal conversations, people clarify things all the time. It helps people understand each other better. But something subtle happened during that moment. The conversation quietly moved one step away from the topic, and one step closer to your behavior. To how you speak. To how your words might affect them. So, you stayed careful. Not because you felt forced to. Just because it seemed polite to avoid another misunderstanding. You remember that moment, don't you? When the conversation started feeling slightly more delicate. Slightly more focused on what you said, and how it sounded. Not difficult. Not uncomfortable. Just something that made you choose your words a little more carefully than before. And that small adjustment is often how the first boundary test quietly begins. Because once the conversation moves in that direction, even a little, the pattern has space to grow. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, one small moment at a time. So, the conversation continued. Nothing looked different from the outside. The same topics. The same tone. The same normal moments people share every day. Still, something inside the conversation had already shifted a little. You started noticing your words more carefully. Not in a dramatic way. Just small moments where you paused for half a second before saying something. Maybe you added an explanation before a comment. Maybe you softened a sentence that normally wouldn't need softening. Just small adjustments to keep things smooth. Because avoiding misunderstandings felt like the reasonable thing to do. They didn't ask for much. Not directly. Just small reactions here and there that made you think twice about what you said. So, you adjusted again. You chose words more carefully. You clarified things earlier. You made sure your meaning couldn't be taken the wrong way. None of this felt like a problem at the time. It felt like consideration. Like being thoughtful in a conversation with someone who mattered. You noticed it, didn't you? The way a conversation can slowly become more delicate. Not tense. Not uncomfortable. Just something that makes you a little more careful than before. And that carefulness slowly becomes normal. Soon you start explaining things before anyone even asks. Clarifying your tone. Making sure everything sounds right. Because once a small adjustment works, it becomes easy to repeat it. And without noticing it, the balance in the conversation quietly begins to move. After a while the moments stop feeling random. The same type of situation keeps appearing in different conversations. A simple remark turns into a question about what you meant. A normal opinion becomes something that needs explaining. At first it still feels small. Nothing dramatic is happening. The conversations still look normal from the outside. No arguments. No raised voices. Nothing that would clearly signal a problem. But inside the conversation something keeps repeating. They pause slightly after something you say. They ask what you meant by it. They react as if the words might carry a different meaning than you intended. So, you explain again. Not because you feel forced to, but because explaining seems easier than letting the moment grow into something bigger. A short clarification keeps the conversation calm. A careful sentence keeps everything moving forward. You probably remember how reasonable that felt at the time. Clarifying things is normal. People misunderstand each other sometimes, and a short explanation usually solves it. But the same situation appears again. And then again a little later. Different conversation. Different topic. But the same kind of moment. Slowly the focus of the conversation begins to move. Instead of simply talking about the subject, the attention shifts toward how your words sound. Toward whether something might come across the wrong way. You notice it, don't you? Before saying something, you pause for a moment. Just long enough to think about the wording. Just long enough to make sure it won't create another misunderstanding. Sometimes you soften a sentence before finishing it. Sometimes you explain your intention before anyone even asks. The adjustment becomes automatic because it seems easier than repeating the same uncomfortable moment again. And this is where the pattern becomes clearer. They did not need to control the conversation directly. There was no command. No obvious pressure. The only thing they needed was the adjustment that followed their reactions. A small reaction leads to an explanation. A quiet pause leads to another clarification. A simple question about tone leads to a softer version of what you originally meant to say. Each moment still feels harmless on its own. None of them look serious enough to stop the conversation. But when the same pattern repeats, the balance slowly changes. You begin carrying more of the responsibility for keeping the conversation smooth. For making sure nothing sounds wrong. For preventing another moment where your words might be questioned. And once that responsibility settles into the conversation, the dynamic is no longer the same. They didn't force control. They only needed you to adjust. And every adjustment quietly gave them more space. After a while the situation stops feeling confusing. The same small moments have appeared too many times to ignore. The same reactions. The same pauses. The same quiet questions about what you meant. And slowly the pattern begins to look familiar. At the beginning it did not look like a pattern at all. Each moment seemed small enough to move past. A short explanation. A quick clarification. And the conversation continued. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that clearly looked like a problem. But repetition changes how things appear. When the same type of moment returns again and again, the shape of it becomes easier to recognize. The conversation slowly stops feeling random. It begins to look like something that has been happening for a while. You remember when that realization started forming, don't you? No big confrontation was needed for that moment. No argument had to explode for the pattern to become visible. Instead it appears quietly. The pauses become noticeable. The questions about what you meant start feeling familiar. The careful explanations start sounding the same each time. Once that happens, the confusion begins to fade. The situation becomes easier to see for what it is. Small reactions leading to explanations. Explanations leading to more careful conversations. Nothing suddenly explodes. The other person may not change at all. The only difference is that the pattern now has a clear shape. And when something becomes clear, it no longer works in the same quiet way as before. The moments that once passed unnoticed now stand out immediately. The pauses. The reactions. The careful wording all become visible. Seeing it does not force a decision. It does not automatically change the situation. But it changes how clearly the situation is understood. And once clarity is there, the next step belongs to you. If you decide to